Out now, brown cow. Out now, brown cow. Unique New York. Unique New York.
I need to pump up music again. After all that. Right. I do like a rolling start, so like there is no beginning apart from my will to go. Welcome to the Monitor News. This week's show is slightly different because this is the first episode we're recording in Austin. We're coming to you live from Sounds HQ in Austin. We've got some beers in hand. My name's Ollie Judge, and I'm joined by some friends from the American Sound team. But more specifically, first, my co-host, PJ Rohal. Do you want to tell us about what you do at Sound?
Sure. Thanks, Ali. My name is, you already said my name, PJ Rohal. I'm the head of fraud strategy and education with SEON. So I help to understand the different fraud use cases, kind of externally educating and learning from the industry as well, but also internally educating and understanding how our technology and other technology can help solve many, many different fraud use cases across multiple industries. So delighted to be here. Thank you.
And I've learned so much from you, including a lot about sport from Philadelphia.
Yes. Yeah, we'll leave the Phillies topic to maybe another podcast, but we definitely could spend about an hour on that.
Cool. And also, we've got a new guest. We've got Andrew. So Andrew, do you want to tell us what you do at SEON?
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to be here. I'm Andrew. I'm a BDM here at SEON, which means I'm basically trying to connect as many people as possible to our product, focusing on the US, of course, but internationally as well.
Nice. So on the show, we're going to talk about some stories that have been in the news recently, and I'm going to thank Gergu, Florian, and Eric for helping us out with some news stories today. We're going to go on a bit of a weird tour. We're going to go from like hiring fraud through a bit of crypto and some stuff that happened on LinkedIn where some people just disappeared. But we're going to start off with hiring fraud, which like for me is a bit of a weird one. So we've got a story from Hacker News. It's not really a story. It was just a giant forum thread about essentially fraudulent people applying for jobs at companies and getting passing interviews and maybe not being the person that they were pretending to be. I kind of get it. I've struggled to get my head around like what the whole process is. But Andrew, you've had some personal experience around this. Can you give us a bit of a rundown of why someone might do this and then where you would potentially see it the most?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty personal story. In a past life, I was helping build IT teams, and these were largely remote jobs, right? So think of this kind of competitive job market for really in-demand IT roles. But then there is a skills gap, but there are also a lot of positions open, right? So what we found people were doing is they would have even video interviews with our recruiters, and these were technical interviews all the way from that to tell me about yourself, kind of personal interviews. But what people would do was they'd get on video and then they would have their mouth moving, but then the sound didn't match up. And this is really similar to the Y Combinator story from Hacker News that is uncanny.
So is the angle here to like, can the people actually do the jobs that they're applying for, or is it just to sort of like get in the door and then burn yourself after 2 weeks once you've...
I think for the more competitive jobs, they are trying to just nail the interview and have a wonderful presentation of their would-be technical skills. And once they're in the job, they can kind of ease into it at their own pace. I think they could do it, but they're definitely not going to be the top performers that they said they were.
So is it there? Oh, you said that you had a couple of people moving their mouths, but the right thing not necessarily coming out, or how are they doing this? How are they getting this far in a process that they could potentially get a job?
It's easy to make a resume look good, but hiring is a human problem. You want to get in front of your candidate and understand them, right? You want to check for legitimacy. And they were doing this literally by mouthing words, kind of like a cartoon character or something, really lip synced. But there's someone literally sitting behind the laptop actually answering the questions.
So was there a bit of a surge around this kind of like during the pandemic when people didn't actually physically have to show up to places?
When I read this article and saw the date about a month ago, I was like, yeah, definitely still a pandemic problem, especially as we continue to hire remotely. This is just going to happen for remote roles.
So we spoke a little bit earlier about like how you weed the people out. I think you're working with someone at the moment that may or may not be a SEON client. But like how do people sort of get across this in a way that, you know, they're not going to waste a bunch of time on people that
Yeah,
are like this?
we were recruiting at scale, and so this client I have is also trying to create a startup around verifying the legitimacy of candidates, and we got to do that in a way that's not too invasive to the candidate process. Want to ruin their experience, and for recruiters, we don't waste a lot of time. So there's got to be a little bit of an extra signal to kind of get that liveliness, that legitimacy.
Yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to see how people weed this out long term. I feel like as people push more towards remote stuff and we see more and more sort of like, let's call them high value jobs, shift, there's a big demand from senior people not to come back to the office. So you're seeing a lot of like, you know, mid 6-figure jobs go remote.
Which I guess is the motivation of fraudsters anyways, to make money, and jobs turn into money. It's just, this is a bizarre way of going about it. And how do you actually be successful? Even if you're, you know, end up being successful at the job, it seems like it's a scam, it's a fraud that's eventually going to collapse on itself.
I was going to say, what's the like end game here? Like either you burn out pretty quick and fail.
Yeah. Maybe you get lucky and you are good enough and they just got past those entry level stages. Reminds me of people cheating on SATs to get into better colleges. And there was scandals around that 5 or 10 years ago. So yeah, I imagine most people just get caught and it's just an awful idea. But maybe
Yeah,
so.
I don't know, PJ. In a world where there's quiet quitting and being overemployed, I wonder if, I mean, actually, I don't even need to wonder. I almost guarantee that people fly under the radar like this all the time, and they're working in jobs right now.
You never know, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, like I remember reading a story maybe a couple of years into the pandemic, because that's where we are right now. but sort of like highly skilled engineers taking on like 2 jobs because they could, and sort of having very complex calendars where they were dodging certain meetings with one company and then going to the other. But then after a bit, just hiring someone else to do the other job.
Yeah.
Outsourcing their
Yeah.
job.
And like, is this just the sort of like next evolutionary step of that we feel?
Yeah. And back to college, paying someone to write your paper, doing that type of plagiary and stuff. Nothing I've ever done.
I mean, I'm not
but
sure how much
it's-
I believe that, but yeah.
I mean, it's human nature to try to take the easy way, whether it's for better grades or for better jobs or for more money, or just stealing money directly, like we see with most fraudsters. So it's a spin on that, but the same motivations, same type of reasons people do it.
Well, talking about jobs, let's talk about some jobs that people were forced into, shall we? Maybe against their will. So we've got a story about people that were forced into scamming people through a call center.
Yeah.
PJ, can you help us elaborate on the story a little bit and how it came to be?
Yeah, it's a Krebs on security. Brian Krebs, well-known investigative reporter. He puts a lot of great content out there, and I think most people are familiar with scams. You know, if not, you know, there's so many ways that people can get scammed, manipulated, socially engineered to do things, whether it's give up information or make payments to a fraudster. In this case, the person scamming was not a willing participant. They were being kind of forced into it, or potentially scammed into it. Maybe they thought it was something different than it was. So it's, you know, the person doing the scamming is the victim as well as the person they're scamming who's the victim. So it's, I mean, when you look at all types of fraud use cases, scams in general are the harshest in the sense that you can lose a lot of money. It's really hard to get it back. And the psychological damage can be significant. So you add on top of that the psychological damage and to the person doing it, who's not even voluntarily doing this, they're kind of being assembled of, you know, these involuntary scam armies. It's it's just taking that up a notch, and it's just a sad story, but it's the reality of where fraud is in our society right now.
So, like, we've across all of our series, like the context and the method, like scams and fraud seem to be synonymous. But would you say like fraud's the act of really trying to commit something, and then scam is the trick at the end of the fraud? Like where
it's a blurry line. I look at scams as any time you're using a social engineering tactic, which is basically manipulating somebody psychologically, preying on their emotions to do something that involves a scam. So there's fraud tied to it most times, or if it's scamming somebody out of information, kind of like a information security issue, but then that leads right to fraud. So it overlaps InfoSec and fraud, but it almost always leads to fraud because that's why they're manipulating the people to monetize it in some way.
Sure. So in the story, it goes into a bit of a deep dive into particularly Asia, where people are being like either recruited or forced into being recruited, sometimes by kidnapping, it seems, through the story. Is there we deal with a lot of data here at SEON, rather than just thinking about people? Is there a way that fraud prevention companies can actually help with this kind of stuff? This seems like more of a social engineering thing than something that we could potentially detect to help people prevent themselves from falling for something from a call center or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, the actual manipulation of the person is really difficult to detect with technology. There's things like behavioral biometrics, how you're interacting with the keyboard, stroke patterns, pressure, where you can maybe detect is this person being manipulated, their session time, are they nervous as they're pressing keys, things that we can look into. Also monetary and non-monetary behavior. So why are you all of a sudden transferring $35,000 to an account that you never do? It's a higher dollar amount. It's an unknown account. So there's those type of signals. So but the actual person, when they're being manipulated, it's super tough. So that's why education is a huge component of it. Getting people to understand before they're scammed, the signals and the red flags. But it's tough when you're in a psychological when you're being manipulated psychologically and you're in an emotionally, heightened state, you forget all that training probably. So there is some technology, there's some data, there's some signals you can look at, but that's why it's in my opinion the hardest type of fraud to stop.
Sure. I'm going to roll back to that education note for a second. Because it seems that there is now a bit of a sport around detecting these call centers and these things that, particularly on YouTube, there are a few people out there that are out to get these guys. And I'd liken it more to entertainment than it is education. But Andrew, you seem to have dug into this world a little bit.
Quite shamelessly, I've probably spent maybe just a couple hours watching these videos of some YouTube celebrities like Jim Browning or Mark Rober taking down not only individual scammers and wasting their time, but kind of attacking the system too. I mean, just like this article shares, there are call centers for this. And once we get a WhatsApp that ties to an account that's based out of a geography, or we get any IP addresses from the scammer's own tools when they tunnel in, that gives these YouTubers a bit of a way to go about stopping it.
What does it say about our psychology that we like watching this stuff? I mean, if we're talking about the psychology of how scammers go about it and they commit fraud through other people, what does it say about us?
Well, I think it's entertaining, and everyone can justify it because it's being done to bad people, right?
Yeah, I mean,
and that's how I think even people who are committing fraud, some people who are saying, the bank, they'll get their money back, or the person will get their money back if it's card fraud. The bank is, big enough. They don't, you find ways to justify that. And that's, I'm sure, the type of entertainment that we're watching. Scammers getting scammed. We're saying, hey, if people are going to be doing this, they deserve it. And frankly, I think they do. But I think that it's that type of entertainment, that type of justification that makes it okay for most people to say that you can do this.
Well, why do we watch heist movies? Why do we watch cops and robbers stories and all kinds of good guys versus bad guys stories? I think it's because we see a little bit of ourselves in the good guys. We want to think that, and I think we also sympathize with some of the victims as well. I mean, that could have been like your elderly grandparent. It could be someone and I think we see that reflection, and it's very engaging to watch how these stories go down.
But where it's tricky is if the scammer, is, you know, is the victim too, and you're messing with them, not knowing maybe that they are the victim and being forced into scamming. That's where, we're always can be enlightened on something that it still might not be right if that person's the victim. But how would you know that in a lot of cases?
That's an interesting take on it, because I think that this article highlights something unique about the situation of these call centers in Asia. These people aren't allowed to leave. They had their passports taken. They weren't given enough pay to get the plane ticket back home or whatever it might be, and they were abused. And that's a dirty reality of the world of fraud.
Yeah, and it's basically human trafficking, and whether it's for drugs, sex, being having people scam and do fraudulent acts. There's just people just manipulate actual human beings and like enslave them to do things like that's just awful stuff.
It's really a diverse ecosystem of the people that provide the platform for this, the scammers, and of course the victims themselves. There's a lot of moving parts, which is why I think it's such a sticky problem.
Yeah. Well, maybe the YouTube. Maybe the YouTubers are lifting up a bit of awareness to help people think about this stuff in a better way. And I know some of it's a bit clickbaity, but at the same time, they do seem to go after the people that are running the call centers rather than the people that they get on the phone.
Yeah,
I agree. There's probably some research behind that.
Yeah.
They're not before they, really lay into them. And I'm a big fan of education being done through entertainment, because that's when people remember, when they're entertained. So I think that is a good point. And there's all kinds of documentaries and Netflix on scams, and those have their own place in education, because people at least are paying attention to them. There's super boring, education, infosec scam that nobody pays attention to just because it's so boring. And even if it's good information, if you're not listening to it, then it doesn't matter.
Exactly. So, in this story, we've got people disappearing into call centers, never to be seen again, or hopefully to be seen again if the YouTubers do their job right, and so do law enforcement. But what happens when you get erased from a platform like LinkedIn without a moment's notice? It seems like we've got a story here about how a bot attack wiped out Apple and Amazon employees off LinkedIn, which is a rather weird series of events that affects some very high profile people. PJ, have you read the story before I dive in?
I thought it was different, and that's what I'll just say. I thought they were all fake accounts.
Yeah, this was
But I think there was fake accounts, and then it started wiping out the
actual real.
Yeah.
maybe they went a little bit too scorched earth on it.
Yeah.
But it was people within the own company saying, "Hey, these people have fake profile." I guess who deleted the accounts?
Looks like. While we're doing that, make a noise. Like my phone.
So I think LinkedIn was combating it. Signal Hire was trying to help identify it.
Maybe we can just talk about the problem of fake accounts and the fact that this stuff that there's that many people out there that they have to.
Sure. I'd like to talk about the tools available, because some of these profile photos are AI generated. That's a very recent trend.
Cool.
Let's get into it.
I might just kick to you guys. See where it goes.
Been like the Twitter thing with fake accounts of Elon Musk, buying and then not buying and then buying again.
So, speaking of people that have sort of disappeared, hopefully not into a call center, but there seems to have been a bit of a mass exodus of people on LinkedIn that worked particularly for Amazon and Apple. This seems to be part of a cleanup thing that maybe went a bit wrong. PJ, do you want to tell us a bit more about this story?
Yeah. And as I look at it, this is a Krebs on security story.
I think the last one was
I
something
inaccurately did that, but I'm sure Krebs did a story on that as well, the scammers. But and I mean, these were LinkedIn accounts for people who said they worked at Apple or Amazon. There was a snapshot of how many people worked, according to LinkedIn for those companies. And then I think a day later it dropped like 33% because I think correctly they were trying to dispose of all these fake accounts. And that's basically what it gets down to. And it's not just LinkedIn, it's Twitter. Everyone heard about Elon Musk and he wants to buy Twitter. And then he heard about all the fake accounts, which I'm sure he knew that there was fake accounts anyways, and then didn't want to. And I believe he did eventually buy it. But it's just a massive problem, not just a social media problem, but you think of stealing, I steal Andrew's identity information, I set up an account in his name, that's one thing. But you can also just set up completely fake accounts with certain information, and setting up profiles on a professional platform like that, I'm sure has its own agenda, not just setting them up for the fun of it. So account onboarding, the risks at account onboarding, setting up fake accounts across social media sites, I guess not shocked that they fluctuate this much, and in just one day saw a 33% drop, which is a lot of accounts.
Yeah, looking at the stats for the date and time, the number of employees for each of these companies, it really is staggering. 10/9/22, 1.25 million Amazon employees, and just a couple days later, 2 days later, 840,000. That's 33%. Literally in a day or two. And it makes you wonder, well, how did these get here? What are the tools available to the fraudsters to create such an account? And then how did they slip through the cracks? It's really incredible, the story here.
Yeah. I mean, one of the use cases is maybe you're creating a fake exec profile to scam somebody and say, hey, I'm this person. It's a big company. You might not know if they're actually a real exec person. I need you to take an action for me, whatever it is. And even if they look them up, they have this fake profile. So that's just one thing that it could be used for. But yeah, it's super concerning, and it's a battle for LinkedIn, for Twitter, for any company, especially of that scale and size, because there's always a use case to create a fake account. It's it could be used obviously at a bank. You could be using a checking savings account to launder money through that. Setting up fake accounts or setting up fraudulent accounts with any line of credit is great because you get a line of credit extended to you and then you use all of it. So that's a more obvious one. But I think what's interesting is some of these less obvious. Why are you setting up fake accounts at people who don't exist at certain companies? And then you got to think like a fraudster and go down the rabbit hole of what they could actually be doing with these things. And we probably haven't even scratched the surface with all the things you can do.
Right. Yeah. I'm amazed at the realism of these fake accounts. What really struck me as kind of disturbing was everyone had a profile photo. This wasn't just some kind of blank profile on LinkedIn with hardly any experience or a title, but it looked like a real person. And what the article describes is that they were using AI-generated bot accounts. So not just the content, but the images. These were realistic-looking faces, but they weren't even real humans. These were auto-generated. And it's staggering, especially to the tune of 500,000 fake accounts. Just incredible what's available to the fraudsters.
Yeah. And then what's interesting, if someone's using, what email, what phone, what information links to those accounts. So if a genuine person's email links to that, that would be hard when someone's applying for an account. But I imagine some of these are linked to disposable emails and they don't have a significant, they're not setting up these accounts across a lot of social media sites and digital platforms. With SEON, we look across, 50, 100, upwards of 200 digital sites. So I think you can create fake accounts. You can link them to real emails. You can have some type of a presence, but to actually spoof a full digital presence of what an actual person has, which is loads of accounts, not just social media, Google, Amazon, Pinterest, anything that is digital, then that will be the real proof of whether they're an actual person.
And I entirely agree with this because these accounts might have looked super organic and unique, most importantly, very unique. This was important for the kind of attack this was, but it all falls down. The facade is, very thin. You dig just a little bit deeper and all of these have probably a few commonalities, which is why they're able to cut down all these accounts very rapidly over a few days.
All right, looking for a segue.
Is it on the wall?
No, I got it. So does this stuff kind of potentially constitute the beginning of like a synthetic identity, maybe not linked to a social security number, but like you said, but we score a lot of people based on their social profiles and stuff like that. Is this a way of sort of like creating that soft footprint of metadata of someone that exists that obviously doesn't?
Yeah, it could be just to kind of give that illusion of life, proof of life is what they talk about with synthetics, and you know, more obvious synthetics have no proof of life. Some have fake social media accounts that were created and stuff. But if you're using the right tools, the right data, you can, look through the layers of this and see what kind of substance is behind it. Because some bad actors will go, to lengths of creating these seemingly real accounts that are not.
To Ollie's point and your point, PJ, I think that the methods for fake account creation are more than ever, and they're growing at such an incredible rate. But our methods of detecting these fake accounts are often leaving legitimate users sort of in the dust. I think that we are, using very vague techniques to detect individuals, and when we expose information, it often looks to be a little bit harmful to the non-bot users of the site.
Yeah.
So, talking about identity and valuable information, our next story is all around some exposure of customers' information from a failing crypto startup. And so one of my favorite sites, Web3, is going great. There's a lot of hype around Web3 and metaverses and all kinds of nonsense. But Molly White has put together a fantastic website that collates all of the stuff that maybe isn't going so great.
So she's being sarcastic. Web3 is going just great.
I mean,
I get it.
I am British, so this speaks to my soul. So the crux here, the big story here was that there was a big company called Celsius, and they were kind of like crypto's poster child. They've recently had a bit of a giant collapse that everyone had to pay attention to. They've pulled down 3 other companies as well. And with that raft of stuff also came all the data of the people that were attached to it. Now, the interesting thing about Web3 and crypto is that usually the whole point of it is that it's anonymized. You're not supposed to be on the record of like having invested in it. And the things like the Equifax breach a few years ago and all that kind of stuff, it was the things that people flocked to crypto in the first place to have some autonomy around their identity and how they govern their information. But it seems like maybe that's beginning to implode, and the secrets that they thought they were keeping aren't being held so close to their chest. So my question to both of you is, with this information out there and potentially more crypto fallouts sort of coming up, how does this affect the fraud world? Does this mean that we're going to have even bigger data breaches where not just people's information like emails and credit cards is out there, but also their asset records? Because that's exactly what crypto does. It links you to the assets that you own and how you control them. So what does that mean for fraud? How bad could this get if things keep falling over?
I think we're at an interesting inflection point in the switch between Web 2 to Web 3.
Yep.
Again, the technology of crypto is outpacing our ability to monitor and regulate. I think that as a digital wealth transferring platform, crypto is incredible. It's everything we hope it to be. But in the meantime, we've got to make that switch. And so what we're doing is we're taking down traditional points of reference for these exchanges, but then we're kind of ignoring the anonymity piece that is crucial to the idea of crypto. And when it goes wrong, things like this happen.
Yeah, and I'm going to stay out of Web3 too much because Web 2 is challenging enough for me. But I do think, I mean, when it comes to fraud and, the anonymity can be a good thing, but also think about if money's being, fraudulent money is being kind of laundered through crypto exchanges, and then you have to trace all of that through through that environment, and that's not easy. There's certain companies that can risk rate crypto exchanges and do tracing of cryptocurrencies, and that's something that evolved along with Web3 and cryptocurrencies and being able to track fraudulent funds. But there's And there's good ways to trace it from what I know at a high level, but it's just another way and another thing we need to learn, another avenue that fraudsters will go to hide fraudulent money, to launder it, and we need to have data and technology to keep up with that. So I guess that's my piece on Web3 frauds. This specific case I'm not quite as familiar with, but it's a lot to keep up with. Like I said, in the traditional fiat fraud world, it's Lord, there's plenty of use cases and scams, and everything we talked about there can also be applied to crypto scams and investment scams. So it kind of overlaps there. But I guess the last thing we need in the fraud world is more fraud use cases, but that's what we get.
Nice. And on that bombshell, I'm going to wrap up our show from Austin here. I want to say thank you to both of you. And we're going to do plugs on this one. We like, this isn't a big narrative show, so we can actually talk about what you guys have going on. So, Andrew, where can people find you online and try to prevent people from stealing your information? Because you can go wherever you want to go.
You can certainly find me on all of my publicly available social media sources like LinkedIn, Andrew Angelic on LinkedIn. Also, I have a YouTube channel, but it's more personal. But, maybe we'll change that with some more fraud-related content in the near future. I'm inspired by our host here, so that's where you can find me.
Thank you. And PJ, where can people find you online?
Online. Well, in the real world, you can find me in front of any television with a Phillies World Series or an Eagles football game on. In the digital world, you can find me often on LinkedIn, keeping it somewhat professional, then mixing in my kids and other cool things that I just make me who I am. So dad life, work life, LinkedIn, and About Fraud is a website and community that I co-founded. So all things Fraud Fighter there as well.
Nice. And as for me, you can find me at Ollie Judge on Twitter, or drop me a line at contentcrew@seon.io. Come talk to us on Twitter. We're at Seon Tech. And you can find us on LinkedIn by searching Seon Fraud Fighters. Fraud Fighters. As always, if you liked what you've heard this week, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. And please leave us a review if you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.